Hello and welcome to The World This Week with me, Gavin Lee. The third week in a row where the world's most powerful man has dictated the course of world events. In Trump's world this week, his suggestion to own Gaza, empty out the population, the most jaw-dropping of a staggering series of announcements, which have included the sanctioning of the International Criminal Court, taking over Greenland, the Panama Canal, hitting allies with tariffs, triggering trade wars and peace for now with neighbours after he changed his mind on Canada and Mexico. The Trump plan to resettle Palestinians elsewhere replaces the usual US stance with a two-state solution of a real estate solution. The Riviera of the Middle East, he says, Gaza Lago, to accusations of ethnic cleansing. He claims he's doing it for them.
So you think it will happen at the end?
I think there's a good chance, yeah.
How many people are you thinking about?
All of them. I mean, we're talking about probably 1.7 million people, 1.7 million, maybe 1.8 million. But I think all of them. I think they'll be resettled in areas where they can live a beautiful life and not be worried about dying every day.
It's been a week that's seen the French PM live to fight another political day, surviving 2 votes of no confidence in 3 weeks. François Bayrou risked the same tactic on Wednesday that cost his predecessor, Michel Barnier, the job, forcing through a budget without a vote in Parliament. Trust in me seems to be the message, and for now his minority government carries on. Does he have any more room, though, for manoeuvre? We'll discuss what's going on.
I would simply like to welcome the climate in which this second no confidence vote was examined. I say second because there may well be others.
And it's been a week where Keir Starmer opted to play the grey man to attract minimal attention as he arrived in Brussels this week, the first invite for a British leader at an EU summit since Brexit 5 years ago. Well, President Trump threatening tariffs on the Union, offering support for either side being potentially alienating the other. We're going to look at Operation Keep Quiet and Carry On. Did he get away unnoticed?
Look, in relation to the relationship between the UK and the US and the EU, I've always been clear that both are important to us. Now, that for me isn't new. I think that's always been the case and will be the case for many, many years to come.
Well, my guests from the world's people this week, foreign correspondents from around the globe in this case. Joining us from Berlin, Stephen Erlinger, Chief Diplomatic Correspondent in Europe for the New York Times. Stephen, great to see you. Thank you for being with us. Tell me, is there anything resembling election fever right now in Germany ahead of elections in 2 weeks?
Hard to tell about election fever in Germany. It's a very stable, quiet place. There has been a lot of anxiety. Friedrich Merz is not especially popular, though everyone expects him to become chancellor. He makes some mistakes sometimes. The big question is, who does he go to bed with? What kind of coalition will emerge? Will the Free Democrats make the 5% into parliament? And if the smaller parties don't make it, then the Alternative for Deutschland, the very far right-wing party, becomes the official opposition, which I think worries quite a lot of people. But for the moment, it's a campaign, it's steady, it's typically German, rather boring. Angela Merkel, who's never liked Friedrich Merz, supports him, but with a bit of hesitation. And in the meantime, the election is February 23rd. So will there be a government soon after that? We'll see. It could take 5-6 weeks to form a coalition.
So,
in the meantime, nothing's collapsing.
Nothing's collapsing. Not a frenzy, but certainly exciting for German standards. And this firewall questions about will it hold around the AfD, notably not invited to the Munich Security Conference, it seems, next week as well. Stephen, great to have you on board. Let's go to Washington. Let's bring in Sonia Dridi, freelance correspondent for France 24 and a number of French media. And I believe, Sonia, you had a run-in with a Trump supporter, conspiracy theorist Marjorie Taylor Greene this week. What happened there then?
Oh, yes. So I was at the press briefing last Friday and I asked a question to the spokesperson who took my question. She doesn't take that many questions from foreign reporters, unfortunately, now. And I asked her about, after the crash that happened in DC, if, you know, with all the buyouts they are offering to federal workers, and also the fact that they're freezing a lot of hiring of federal workers, if that could not lead to more incidents of different kinds in the country. And that was striking, the fact that Majority Leader Green listened to my question, because actually the answer of the spokesperson of the White House was pretty interesting, and a lot of media, US media, put it on air. And so Majority Leader Green heard my questions, and she was basically saying that, look at this French reporter's accent, look at this reporter's accent. She didn't know, I think I was French, even though it's pretty obvious. And she basically said that foreign reporters should be out of the press room, which is, even though she's really one of the most extreme, she's a complotist, she's well known in Trump world to be a very extreme member of the Congress. It's problematic because we know that some people in this administration also think that the foreign reporters should have much less room, and we should basically, leave the room for new voices, as they call them. It's pretty much media who are close to the Trump administration. So even though she really represents an extreme current, it's also worrisome to see that some people in the Trump world think that foreign reporters should basically be out of the press room.
It is, especially if they're making way for independent bloggers, YouTubers, and many people, some analysts have said, that haven't been to the scene to see the things that bigger corporations are looking at. And maybe it's a badge of honour that Marjorie Taylor Greene did say that, because some of the finest journalists have been insulted, including also the former British Prime Minister David Cameron. He was called a donkey's bottom, for want of a better word. Sonia, great to have you on the programme. Let's bring in Ana Navarro Pedro, Paris-based correspondent for Portuguese media. Great to have you on the programme.
Thank you. Great.
Since we last spoke, Antonio Costa, your fellow Portuguese countryman, has been getting his feet under the table at the EU Council as chief. How's he getting on? Is he popular?
He is popular. He's been very discreet. He's not he's trying to patch up relations between the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and the Council. His predecessor, Monsieur Michel, he didn't get along with Ursula von der Leyen, and there were lots of tensions. So for the time being, he's been patching up relations. He has already convinced council members to have shorter meetings for council for the 27 heads of.
Only a good thing.
Only a good thing for everybody. Apparently, there was already one that was shorter and everybody was clasping. But for the time being, he's just, testing the waters.
Yeah. I've been to summits at 5 a.m. where you look up at the ceiling of the Justice Lipsus building and say, please help me, somebody. And it carries on. Anna, great to have you here. Let's bring in Rina Bassis as well, Paris-based writer, journalist, long-time correspondent for Israel's public radio, Khan, as well as Al Monitor. And in a previous life, Rina, Deputy Ambassador to Bogota. Hello to you. Are there times in these chaotic moments where you reflect on the diplomatic life that you left behind for a journalist while instead? I think L.P. Hartley, the author, once said, the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. Do you regret it? Or, was it as non-stop then as it is now?
I kind of feel that I'm in the same sort of environment, because once you leave diplomacy and you become a journalist, then you are talking about diplomats and talking with diplomats. So you can't really escape that life. But there is a great advantage to being a journalist, and you must know that as well, that we can say what we think, which is not the case of diplomats. And I would say that for Israeli diplomats, the last few governments have not been especially easy. It's not an easy task always to express the opinions and the positions of the Netanyahu government. So I'm quite happy being a journalist.
Yeah, even if you see the airport queues and the diplomats rushing through, you've had years of having to wait now. Rina, great to have you on board as well. Well, let's begin. And to understand the events of the last few days and to take in the staggering shift in US policy on the Middle East, it can help to take perspective by looking back. Benjamin Netanyahu has been visiting the Oval Office since the mid-90s. Trump's presidential predecessors have all been unwavering on the stance. The words almost a mantra, the only way forward to achieve peace being to strive for a two-state solution, an Israeli state side by side with a future Palestinian state. I want to show you, like Dickens's ghost showed Scrooge, let's take a look at what happened back then and what's happening now.
All of you know the United States is still committed to peace and security, and I think we're making some progress in that direction, and I'm going to do whatever I can to advance it.
Mr. Prime Minister, when do you think you'll pull your occupation troops out of the Golan Heights and Lebanon?
Well, you didn't waste any time.
My vision is two states living side by side in peace and security.
Our ultimate goal has to be a secure Israeli state, a Jewish state, living side by side in peace and security with a contiguous, functioning, and effective Palestinian state.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different. Just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has for 100 years.
Well, Donald Trump hasn't officially ruled out a two-state solution, but he's not advocating it, as you can see. The Arab League calls his plan advocating ethnic cleansing. Team Trump says it's about humanity for the Palestinian people. He claims, quote, from the highest levels of leadership, the idea has gotten praise. Trump analysts say it's about distraction. Throw something else into the mix, create an opening gambit, find a solution to something that so far has been unsolvable. Well, Rina, let's start with you. 48 hours on since the announcement. What was your immediate reaction, and has that thinking evolved since?
I think the most astonishing thing at that press conference was that Mr. Trump said, I spoke to all sorts of leaders and they are all very enthusiastic. The question rises, whom did he speak with? He did not speak with Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority. We know that. He obviously did not survey the Gaza Strip to ask the Gazans if they want to be relocated. I think first you have to ask them if this is what they want. He did speak to the leaders of Egypt and Jordan. Both of them are against that. So there are a lot of questions to be raised. I don't know how he thinks that this idea could be implemented. First of all, I think that most Gazans, maybe there are some who would like to leave all of the destruction behind, but I think the majority do want to stay. It's their land, it's their home. They want to rebuild it, rebuild their lives. Many of them lost their families. Of course, they want to stay where they lost their families, not just go away. So that's one thing. And then even if they wanted to go, where will they go? I mean, Arab countries are not going to open their doors to the Palestinians from Gaza for several reasons. First of all, economically, it's extremely expensive. None of these countries can afford it. Second, there is this component of security. We know that Egypt and Jordan are both very afraid that absorbing such a mass immigration would destabilize their regimes. And maybe the most important reason of all is, and you spoke about the two-state solution, a Palestinian state. And for the Palestinian state has to be composed of the West Bank and Gaza. If there is no one in Gaza, no Arab country will take the responsibility of destroying the Palestinian aspiration for statehood.
No, Stephen, just listening to Rina, also worth saying that this is a very good week for Benjamin Netanyahu, isn't it, given the sanctions on the ICC announced by Donald Trump, which we'll get onto in a minute. But if we could run a caption competition for Benjamin Netanyahu's face and the silent reactions while Donald Trump was talking, what do you make of the Israeli PM's body language? Did he know this was coming?
Well, he apparently was briefed about it coming. I think he was smirking a bit. I think it's all science fiction. It'll never happen. But it will calm down his domestic problem, which is inside his own government. I mean, he's kept in power by far-right factions who want the war in Gaza to continue, But if Donald Trump is seen to be such a great advocate of ethnic cleansing, of redoing Gaza, then I think they're more likely to stay inside the government with Bibi Netanyahu rather than leave it. But the real question that hasn't been raised and wasn't raised in this press conference is what to do about Hamas. Hamas is controlling Gaza, and no one's going to rebuild Gaza so long as Hamas is controlling it, let alone the whole problem of the Saudis insisting on a two-state solution. It really is a fantasy. I mean, to give Trump a smidgen of credit, his expression of compassion for the people of Gaza is real, I think. They need a life that's peaceful, secure, safe, but it won't happen if they're thrown out of their land, which they won't go. And it won't happen until Bibi Netanyahu and others decide what to do about who will govern Gaza that is not Hamas.
Yeah, you beat me to it. It was the next point we are raising early on in this piece, which is, as you say, it was kind of tacitly referred to in the press conference. Benjamin Netanyahu setting out 3 things that he wanted to see, and one of them was the destruction, he said, of Hamas as a fighting entity, which kind of leaves an ominous sign for what happens now with the remainder of the ceasefire. Very interesting, Steve, and just Anna, just to pick up on that as well, just to watch what was going on with the press conference itself. We saw a present from Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't know if you saw this. This is what President Trump received. It was this, a golden pager. It tells you about the level of relationship. We're going to see it here. A nod to the attacks of the Hezbollah command structure last year. I'm not sure, are you, that he would have sent the same present to President Biden?
No, I don't think he would. And if the secret services in the United States work well still, they will tear apart that device and see if there are any spying things inside.
Probably doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, no. I'm very dead serious about it. So if they are listening, check it. Yes, but we are all lost in translation with Trump's thoughts. After his declarations on Gaza, I was listening and reading and looking at the analyses and interpretations and translations of thought, of meaning all over the world. And each eminent geopolitist, specialist of the Middle East and so forth, West Asia, as they say now in Asia, and so forth, have a different view or a different take on Trump's words. And of course, there are facts. You cannot send the American military in there. That would be a huge trap, and the American military don't want it. Even IDF, the Israeli army, doesn't want it. Also, Netanyahu, when he says he wants Hamas to be erased, he knows he can't. I mean, he hasn't so far for 2 years,
yes.
1.5 years, so 2 years. So it won't happen. So there was a very interesting, I'm just going to leave it here, a very interesting analysis coming from Tehran, from professors of political science in Tehran. And they were saying that this is obviously a ploy, that no doubt Mr. Trump would be very happy to get his hands on this beautiful premium seaside land and get some development going on. But actually, if he did this, is to prevent Netanyahu from abort the how do you say, it's not the peace, the ceasefire plan. It has 3 stages. We are in first stage, and everybody said Netanyahu will never go to the second stage.
It might push that on further for the truth.
And what they said in Tehran was, well, actually, this is someone who has whispered to Mr. Trump to do something, say something like that, that will prevent Netanyahu from, not going into second phase. I don't know if that is possible. I'm not a specialist.
It potentially keeps the far right on board of the government, doesn't it? The likes of Bezalel Smotrich. Let me go to Washington. Let me bring in Sonia, because this is not the first time it's said. We can't say this apropos of nothing. This was very well rehearsed. It's seen the statement. He repeated it again. Not, musing. Let's go back. Just have a listen to this. This is March 2024. This is his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, in conversation at Harvard University.
And Gaza's waterfront property. It could be very valuable to if people would focus on kind of building up livelihoods. You think about all the money that's gone into this tunnel network and into all the munitions. If that would have gone into education or innovation, what could have been done? And so I think that it's a little bit of an unfortunate situation there. But I think from Israel's perspective, I would do my best to move the people out and then clean it up. But I don't think that Israel has stated that they don't want the people to move back there afterwards.
Have you been looking at that, Sonia, the thread from those words to what we heard this week?
Yeah, exactly. That was an idea that was already put out there by his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and you just heard him. And it really shows how the pro-settlers in his administration really have his ears. Donald Trump really listened to them. He's very close to his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And according to the New York Times, he really insists even more on the idea after his Middle East advisor came back from Israel and said that there was absolutely nothing left from Gaza. And so, I mean, it was pretty striking. I was in the conference, in the press conference, and I could hear really some journalists gasping when they heard him about, saying, we heard him saying he wants to take over Gaza and how, Gaza will be the Riviera of the Middle East. Of course, as a former developer, it's not really surprising from Donald Trump that you really see Gaza with a real estate potential. But there was really like a shockwave in the press conference, and you heard some of the American journalists who got some questions saying that, under which mechanism could you do that? And what about the Palestinians who basically don't want to leave their land? So it is something, he's very surrounded by a lot of people from the far right, evangelicals. And so they absolutely are convinced that that's the right thing to do. But also you could see in the Republican Party that the day after the press conference, the answers were much more divided. Like, they were trying, a lot of them don't dare to criticize Donald Trump, but you could see that some of them were really struck by the comments, and they were trying to calm things down. And according to the New York Times, even Netanyahu wasn't aware of the whole plan and how he called that the Riviera of the Middle East. So it is, coming from Donald Trump, it is not very surprising. And a few days before, I got to talk to him in the Oval Office and ask him a few questions. And I was asking him if he still think it was a good idea to, basically send Palestinians from Gaza to Egypt and Jordan, because also as a former correspondent in Egypt, I know that would be very difficult. The Egypt government don't want that. The Palestinians who already live in Egypt lives in very poor conditions. Yes. And he basically, answers that, yeah, I think, some people say they don't want to, but I think, they're going to agree. So I don't think it's going to, like some of your other guests say, I think, it's not going to happen overnight, but it's definitely a trend in this administration.
Definitely a trend in the administration. Let me just get a thought from you, Rina. Amongst the flurry of things we've seen, the latest, the ICC sanctions, while Benjamin Netanyahu is still there, the International Criminal Court. It's the second time this happened under the Trump administration. This time it's more deep. It's got much more concern about the fundamentals of what happens to the ICC. I know the US isn't a member, but I was talking to Reed Brody, a former lawyer, Attorney General Assistant to New York, said this is an existential crisis to the ICC now because of this. What's your take?
I think he's right, but it was coming. I mean, the moment that Trump won the presidency, I mean, he never made a secret of the fact that he wanted to get back at the ICC, not just for Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Gallant to have with the ICC that issued warrants of arrest against them, but also generally, from his point of view, protecting Americans from something alike. So first of all, I'm not surprised that he took out this measure. What is surprising, I think, is the accumulation of everything that is happening, because he's been issuing all of these decisions very, very quickly, just in a few days after taking office. So we have the Gaza thing, we have all the tariff decisions with Mexico, with Canada, we have the ICC now. And it's clear, I think, that Trump wants to show the world, I'm here, I'm doing. It's not going to be like the last time that I was a president. It took time, it took debates. There were people that were against me in my own administration. Even if you remember, at the time, he was changing quite often his own people, his own entourage kept changing. This is not the case this time. He learned his lessons, and he's going to operate differently.
And he's moving rapidly, Stephen. Let's talk about muzzle velocity, because if we go back, because probably the issue of our moment to work this out as journalists, the dealing with this daily deluge of news at the moment, executive orders, announcements, not a coincidence then. Let's go back to his former key advisor, Steve Bannon. This is what he told PBS, the advice he'd given Trump back in 2020.
I said, all we have to do is flood the zone. Every day we hit them with 3 things. They'll bite on one and we'll get all of our stuff done. Bang, bang, bang. These guys will never be able to recover. But we got to start with muzzle velocity.
Stephen, is that what they're still doing? It certainly feels like it. And if they are, how do we deal with it as journalists? Do you just go moment by moment?
Well, it's a big debate. I mean, someone said that Trump is holding the laser pointer and we're cats chasing it around. I think we have to be careful to distinguish what's real and what's rhetorical. The Gaza plan is pretty rhetorical. We spent a lot of time talking about it here. We spent a lot of time writing about it. It's a bit like writing about science fiction. I mean, it's the President of the United States. It annoys people, it upsets people, it has implications, which we have to discuss. But I think we should also not lose sight of other things that are probably happening right now, like the destruction of USAID. And the destruction of USAID has implications for Gaza, because a great proportion of the aid coming into Gaza under the ceasefire agreement we've just been talking about comes from USAID. And if that stops, it's going to be, and it is stopping, it will have immediate real implications. And it's already having, as your earlier reports have shown, real implications for healthcare in many parts of the world. Similarly, Trump's attack on the Department of Justice, his decision to go after prosecutors who had investigated him, this notion of retribution, I think, is quite real, let alone this notion that Musk has of giving redundancy payments to federal employees just to see what will happen. I mean, none of this is really sanctioned by Congress. And so we do have to keep our eye, I think, on the balls that are real, as opposed to the balloons that are floated to distract us.
A nice analogy, sorting the wheat from the chaff. Sonia, I know you want to come in at here. Sonia in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible, the news, the amount of news we had to deal with since he arrived at the White House for his second term. And I can tell you that the reporters at the White House are already exhausted. And the interesting thing with Donald Trump is like he loves to criticize the liberal media and to hate the liberal media, as he called them. But he loves talking to them. Like, it's incredible the amount of time he spent in the Oval Office, talking to the media, really, trying to almost debriefing like the day. And the access we got to Trump is, definitely more important than the access we got with Joe Biden. Donald Trump is really accessible, and the thing is, like, it's very hard to ignore, because a lot of his comments every day in the Oval Office, in the East Room, are news that we have to talk about, either on Gaza, either on the tariff. So it is, I think it's a pretty big challenge now for journalists to try to focus on the many stories that there is in one day at the White House. And it seems like Donald Trump really enjoys that. I think he definitely wants to set the tone for what's going on in the world, to also, of course, please his supporters. And he announced a lot of things that he knows it's not going to work. But and we saw how he took a setback on tariff, but he still wants to show that he is the one who decide, even if it's on tariff against Canada and Mexico. He also took a step back because the market were reacting pretty badly. But he wants to show his supporters that he's really, he's back and he's going to do things to please them, and he's the one who basically is gonna decide what's gonna happen in the world, and that America is back, and America has to be the strongest country.
Well, let's see. We are 19 days into the presidency. Sonia, I know you're going to a number of press conferences now, so we're going to let you go. Thank you so much for your time. Sonia in Washington is about to go to a number of press conferences. Sandra Drusi for France 24. Worth saying as well, maybe a flood eventually dries up. Floods do. Maybe they just run out of things after day 30. Let's see. Let's take you to events here in Brussels. A notable moment on Monday, Egmont Palace. A British Prime Minister invited back into the fold of the EU for the first time since Brexit 5 years ago for an informal summit on security and defence. A notable venue is where one of Keir Starmer's predecessors, Ted Heath, first signed the treaty which took the UK into what became the EU, the European Economic Council. Fittingly, it's also a venue that was built in the time of trade wars of the 1500s, when conflict over who had dominion over key naval routes for the spice trade dominated. Well, Keir Starmer appeared, as you can see, to be keeping his head down in the midst of the latest trade spat between the EU and President Trump. He wants to reset relations with Europe, get an improved post-Brexit deal, but he doesn't want to be seen as part of the Brussels gang when it comes to Trump's threats of tariffs. Now, Labour sources have told reporters the PM needed to play the grey man. And according to the Survival website, Imminent Threat Solutions, it is the art of being ordinary in everyday circumstances. Dress neutral, do nothing, no bright colours, memorable slogans, avoid cozying up to any particular ally lest you anger another. How did he do? Let's see.
It's very important to be here at this council meeting this evening, representing the United Kingdom on such an important issue. Obviously, it's a wider question of the reset between the EU and the UK, where we want to make progress, but starting with defence and security this evening is very, very important for our interests.
Anna, a good strategy for Keir Starmer, sit on the fence, try not to fall off strategy.
Very grey indeed, with a red word, a reset, which you can put a lot of things in it.
Brexit bingo.
Yeah, let's watch it. It's interesting to see if indeed this rapprochement, is it only something that can be done with Labour in England, or it can be done also with the Tories? We'll see if it's something that can go beyond political division, or if it's just a time in a time frame thing. It would be interesting to get the business moving again nicely, smoothly between Great Britain and European Union, because we are going to lose some of it with the United States for sure. I mean, the tariffs will go at one point. I believe Trump has realized finally that the most beautiful word in his dictionary, which is tariffs, so he says, does imply higher costs for Americans and not for Chinese or for Europeans or for Mexican or Canadians. Maybe he has grabbed it finally, but he will go along that path because it's the only path where it doesn't have any Congress control.
To which?
USA and
yes.
so forth, it will have to be approved or disapproved by Congress, but not with tariffs. And tariffs, sorry, just to finish my thought, tariffs, it's also the premise of his war with China and now with the BRICS.
So, when you look at Keir Starmer playing the grey man, Donald Trump has said, Rina, that Britain is out of line, but it can be fixed. EU, on the other hand, they've got something coming. We're awaiting. We've seen a Reuters statement saying it could be coming in the next few days. Now, Britain's a big security player. It's a significant EU economy as well, or European economy now. Is it good for him to be back? And is he noticed around the table?
I think he doesn't have any choice, because now we are 5 years after the Brexit. And we see that Great Britain, the Brexit did not solve the immigration problem. On the contrary, we all saw all the trouble he had just days into office. It didn't solve the economic problems. I mean, the fact that they are not contributing anymore to the EU budget, that didn't bring an enormous, fantastic economic situation for all the Brits. On the contrary. So I think that he has no choice. He has to negotiate with the EU. I mean, the Brexit deal was just a first step into something that must be much bigger. If he wants to have real economic relations with the EU, if he wants British students to be able to go to study in Europe, if he wants British tourists to travel freely in the European continent, then he has to negotiate. Of course, the word coming back into the EU, that's off the table, I think, for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years in London. But something has to change.
There is talk of something called PEN, the Pan-European Mediterranean Agreement, which is where if you're zipping things around the EU, the component parts don't get customs duties on them, but the finished product does. So we'll see if that gives a little bit of a victory moment. Stephen, this is interesting. A new tell-all book out this week, quoting his chief advisor, Morgan McSweeney, to Keir Starmer, saying this, allegedly. He is, quote, much more of an HR manager than he is a leader. First reported in the Times, even this, making the pages of HR magazine this week. Let's take a look. If we can see it, it quotes other HR staff as saying he should take it as a compliment. Gallery, can we see HR magazine with Keir Starmer? Let's see if they can manage to bring it up. There we go. This is my weekend reading sorted. Stephen, Downing Street said to be in panic mode over this. What's your take?
Well, I've spent 9 years of my life covering Britain at different points. And I think Keir Starmer for Brussels certainly has something to sell. There's a war in Europe. Europe is being required to do more militarily, partly from Trump, but mostly from its own interests. Britain is a nuclear power. It has a serious military all-azimuth force. The Europeans need Britain to be part of the security structure to face a generational challenge from an aggressive Russia. That's what he's got to sell, and it's quite considerable. Now, he is bland and he is gray and he's a lawyer. I've met him. But I think, in a way, for this Labour Party, which has a big majority on the basis of only 33% of the vote, he's probably a perfect leader for the time. Nobody wants too much excitement. They want competence and they want economic growth, and they want to be able to feel that Britain doesn't have to choose between the EU and the US, and you know, that's going to be one of the dicey things for him. So if he's an HR manager, I think that's probably contemptuous and unfair. He's leading a government that is a UN Security Council member, a nuclear power, and has a lot to say in its own right. So no, I don't think he's an HR leader, and I think probably Downing Street should just calm down.
Well, Stephen, if you read HR magazine this weekend, there's a lot of HR managers saying it's not an insult necessarily. It could be a compliment to be a steady pair of hands. Right, you know, let's move.
As a former HR manager, I couldn't agree more.
Well, let's go from the man, the grey man, to the confidence man. 57 days into the job and counting, the French PM, François Bayrou, surviving a second vote of no confidence against him on Wednesday. His centrist-led minority government trying to pass a budget, one that's, well, seen as far too severe for the hard left and the Greens. Knowing he didn't have the numbers, he took the same risk as his predecessor, Michel Barnier, and used special powers, bypassing Parliament, forcing it through Article 49.3. Well, Michel Barnier's political career was over when he tried that in December. The oldest and shortest serving PM, 110 days, a confident vote triggered by the hard left, and that house of cards fell. This time round, François Bayrou survived thanks to the socialist and the far right not bringing him down. Why? What's in it for them? And what wiggle room has he got now? Let's start. Ana Navarro Pedro, a reminder of this was the election called by Emmanuel Macron in the summer. No bloc, left, right or centre got a majority. So this is a government minority struggling on until summer elections. What's your take on Bayrou, the wiggle room he has now?
I knew the answer. We don't know if he's going to be able to stand in office until the summer or not. He passed now his budget because simply I think the parties that could have flunked it, they know that the French can be patient up to a certain point. And when they get angry, and they are fed up now with this situation, with the lack of perspectives. Many companies are going bankrupt. Others are just standing there, waiting, making no investment, not making any buying things from others. And this is already for years 26, 27. We know it in Portugal because we can see that Portuguese companies, their French clients are really very shy, very timid right now because they don't know what the future is going to be. And this is bad for the economy, it's bad for families, it's bad for politics. And people are just waiting for the next parliamentary election. And I dare say for a presidential election as well, although President Macron can stay in power, in office until 27. But many observers say, many analysts say, the good thing would be to have a new president and a new parliament and start over afresh.
Well, he has survived longer than a lettuce, if you remember, famously outliving the political life of the British ex-Prime Minister in the UK, who went after 47 days. A lettuce lived, I believe, to 49. So Bayrou is now close to Michel Barnier's tally of 110. The other side of this, Rina, I want to give you and Stephen both the last minute each, is that the budget goes through, and some of the billionaires of France, like Bernard Arnault, are saying, actually, after the optimism they've seen in the US, France feels like a cold shower right now.
I think nobody is happy with this budget, and I think François Bayrou himself admits that nobody is happy with that budget. It's not a question of pleasing everybody. He has two things that are working for him. First of all, the fact that Barnier was before him. And as Anna said, the French voters, they know how to punish politicians. So enough is enough. We are in February. There is no budget. We can't go on. The second thing is, of course, the rift between the socialists and the extreme left, which didn't really exist after the elections. It was a sort of a process, a growing process. Now the rift is there on the table. So this is the second thing that is working on his favor. So nobody is happy with the budget, but nobody can say no to a budget beginning of 2025, the budget of this year.
I want to give Stephen the last 30 seconds we've got now, but in brief, do you think François Bayrou can limp on? Obviously, the far right have a big say here.
Sure. The budget deficit is still over 5% of GDP. I think the government will fall. There'll be elections this autumn, and we'll see what happens.
Beautifully concise. Thank you so much to the panel alongside us this evening. Stephen Erlanger, Chief Diplomatic Correspondent in Europe for the New York Times. Sonia Drilly, who is just with us from Washington, works for France 24. Rina Bassist, writer, journalist, heads up Israel's Pulse website for Al Monitor and longtime correspondent for Israel Public Broadcasting. And Ana Navarro-Pedro, Paris-based correspondent for Portuguese media. Pleasure to have you all. We will leave you tonight with news from the US, where it was Groundhog Day this week. Pucciatore Phil saw his own shadow, which means 6 more weeks of winter. And in the words of Phil Connors, this is the one time where television really fails to capture the true excitement of a large squirrel predicting the weather. See you in 7 days for the world next week.
Poor animal.
It's Groundhog Day, and maybe life is on a loop. But I miss my burrow. I miss my coop. So I'm headed back down. There's a shadow up here. Get ready for 6 more weeks of winter this year.